Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's CEO Roundtable. We will begin in just a moment. In the meantime, we ask that you introduce yourself in the Zoom chat and include your name, organization, and where you're calling in from. A few technical aspects to review before we get started. Please reach out if you have any technical difficulties. We'll be happy to help you with myself or Jess as our council staff to assist. There is live automated transcript that is available. If you go to the bottom of your screen to select Show Subtitles or View Live Transcript. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and you'll have the opportunity to rewatch anything you might have missed alongside resources that will be shared afterwards. Thank you again for joining us today for our CEO Roundtable. We're grateful that you have joined for this important conversation. I'm pleased to hand it over to today's moderator, Jennifer Flannery Anderson, and she'll introduce today's topic and kick us off. To you, Jennifer.
Oh, thanks, Melissa. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you're joining us from somewhere beautiful and fun, and that you're getting to enjoy a little bit of summer while we continue our work, which obviously never stops. But hopefully, at least you're getting to do this from a remote location. Our topic today, I think, is really interesting and relevant. During the pandemic, many communities and organizations were able to access additional funding from the federal government. And it was really crucial in being able to help sustain nonprofits' work, which really expanded as a result of COVID, and help provide essential services for food, childcare, housing. And as we come to the fourth year since the COVID epidemic started, a lot of that funding has started to dwindle off or cease completely, creating a gap. Some say use the phrase fiscal cliff to describe it, or a waterfall. But no matter what, I think it's a topic that's become painful for all of our communities, maybe in different ways, especially since some of the effects of the pandemic, especially inflation and the costs of food, continue to increase. So we've developed a system where in many ways we may have become dependent, our communities have become dependent on that additional funding or expanded programs, but the funds are quickly going away. The uncertainty of the federal funding has left many community foundations in a position to be able to try to step in and help those organizations. But it's pushed us to be much more wise and discerning in our funding, and to use data-driven decisions to help us best utilize the dollars that we're trusted with. Community foundations obviously play a vital role in driving local change and securing funding. We foster collaborations, and we really do, I think, an amazing job implementing data-driven solutions. Community foundation initiatives not only provide immediate relief, but also create sustainable pathways for long-term community development and individual success. So to give us some really wonderful examples of community foundations positively affecting their community at the local level, we have three amazing speakers I'm going to introduce to you and let them say a few words about themselves, about their organization, and then we'll start into questions for our panelists. So I'm going to start with Dr. Joel Zero, and Joel is the president and CEO of the Park City Community Foundation. Then we have Marlene Spralton. She's the president and CEO of my sister community foundation in Florida, the Community Foundation of Tampa Bay. And finally, Lauren Thomas Priest, program officer at the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta. So Dr. Zero, I'll start with you. If you'd like to offer some opening comments, a little overview on your organization, and some thoughts to help get us started today.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. What an incredible opportunity to be here with fellow colleagues that are in community foundations across the country. I've been with Park City Community Foundation now for just over 2 years. Prior to that, most of my career has been focused on the public urban education space focused, working with nonprofits to help urban school districts get better at what they do, most recently with an organization called Children's Literacy Initiative, CLI, where we focused on making sure kids could read by third grade in large urban school districts. Huge challenge. So when I came over to Park City Community Foundation, it was really wonderful to get different content area focuses, including education. The topic today is, kind of the accordion effect that can come with federal funding, whether it is ARPA funding or large federal grants. And we certainly experienced that here in Park City. Through ARPA and COVID funding, we received about $1.3 million a year in our community to help stabilize early childcare centers. There was a big fear that they were going to be going out of business because of lack of funding. So our story really is about how the Community Foundation stepped in, advocated for local funding to help stabilize a sector that is so critical to our workforce, critical to our families. So happy to get more into that, as our conversation continues. Super relevant, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Joel. All right, Marlene, you'd be kind enough to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marlene Spalton, President and CEO of the Community Foundation Tampa Bay. I've been here now 12 years. It's been the most wonderful job I've ever had and would stay on forever if that were possible. I've been asked to share with you information about our regional competitiveness report, which, because that's a mouthful, we call it the RCR, and how we use that in our community to bring together cross-sector initiatives that help address needs in our community in the most efficient way, because every dollar is precious. So I would love to talk more about that in a few minutes and hear what your comments and questions might be.
Great. And finally, Lauren, please share with us a little bit about the Atlanta Community Foundation.
Sure, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and speak to this group. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about our work. So I am a program officer at the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. I actually started in March 2020. It feels like I started in a different world than the one we live in today. So I'm excited to talk about what that looks like for some of the residents that we serve, specifically around the pilot work that we did last year and will continue this year around relieving student debt for select residents of our neighborhoods of focus.
I've got some more broad questions, but I think what we'll do first is dive into the specific areas you guys highlighted. And then I've got a few broad questions for maybe greater takeaways for the group. And then everyone, if you have questions, if you want to put them in the chat, we'll do our very best to read through them and try to get them answered. So Joel, in order, we'll start with you. So tell us a little bit about your program addressing and providing additional funding for childcare, how this became important to your community, and what role Community Foundation played in this, what must have been a broad community-wide initiative.
Sure. The early childcare crisis isn't unique to Park City. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen talked about it as a classic example of market failure, and that's certainly shown up here. For example, 72% of Summit County residents that's our catchment area where we operate, talk about how 0 to 2 care is inaccessible to them. We're only providing 50% of the spots we need 0 to 5. And this was before our ARPA funding. And then we've got this $1.3 million that's going to be going away, and our child care centers are raising red flags, and they're saying we need help or we're going to go away. We're going to make a difficult situation even worse. So the idea of a cliff is not an exaggeration. And Utah is a very unique state with a unique culture, one that's very family focused and puts primarily the responsibility of child raising on women. So we knew that women and people of color were going to be most hit if child care centers go away. So, and there's absolutely no history of local government picking up the slack and providing funding for early child care centers. So the Community Foundation was incredibly well positioned to bring together community members, people who run centers, local businesses, and local government to say, what are we going to do when this funding goes away? We're going to have a market collapse. And to be perfectly honest, our local government wasn't that interested. They're like, this is, we do potholes and police. This isn't typically the role of a municipality. So we understand the crisis, and boy, we sure do hope you do something about it. Over time, we did a needs assessment with the county and used their data to really highlight the challenge that we funded. And then we brought forward a proposal to both the city and the county councils saying, here's the challenge, here are potential solutions. We understand your constraints and your opportunities. How would you like to move forward? And there was minimal pickup. And so we got involved in bringing people to council and advocating, and we started to do some grassroots organizing for the need. And our town isn't so large that those voices don't go unheard. I would say that the public advocacy is really what moved the needle. And we wound up securing $1 million in early child care subsidies from our city government and $100,000 in county employee benefits for early childhood at the county level to help stabilize the program. And that program is being administered now. I think the constraints are too constraining, and families aren't having enough access to the funds. The spigot isn't turned on enough. And we're going back to council with data saying, here's the utilization rate, here's what the intention was. Let's expand from 100% to AMI, which is average median income, to say 120%. And a couple of other policy moves that could provide more access to early child care. So this isn't an effort at expansion. We're still in crisis mode. This is truly stabilization, but without the work of the Community Foundation, I think we would have been in a far worse position. It's much harder to start up centers than keep them in play.
So, Tom, one of the things here in Fort Lauderdale is our economic development organization has become really engaged with this issue and realizing childcare is a humongous barrier to just people getting to work. So talk a little bit about the messaging that you've used and maybe other partnerships or alignments that you've been able to build your advocacy network from.
When you're talking about early childcare, it checks every single box.
Right.
So it really is a matter of knowing your audience and talking about the devastation and challenges it could bring to young families really wasn't hitting the mark. But once we started to talk about workforce development and keeping workforce at play, that happened to hit our local policymakers a bit differently. We experienced the challenges. We're living in a resort town here, and it's a really bifurcated economy with the incredibly affluent and then service workers. We do have a 20% Latinx population. And without providing that benefit, we're not going to be able to have our cafes and world-class service to benefit the resort town. And so our local chamber became really involved in advocating, because without employees, businesses close, or that burrito costs $25. So we did have to switch up our messaging from what we first thought was kind of a moral stand to one that was more economic focused.
Interesting. Thanks. Thank you. Marlene, talk a little bit about the regional competitive report and the partnerships you've developed there, and maybe how this is influencing and driving some of the decision-making and funding of your community foundation.
Thanks, Jennifer. We started producing the report about 7 years ago. It's funded by our community foundation and United Way, and it's produced by the Tampa Bay Partnership, which is a collaborative of business leaders. We also serve as advisors in determining what information is most relevant and what specific data points provide comparisons to strategically selected 19 comparison communities. They include cities like Seattle, Baltimore, Nashville, Austin, Charlotte, and in Florida, Jacksonville, Orlando, South Florida. We're tracking 65 separate indicators under 5 drivers of our regional economy: economic vitality, innovation, infrastructure, talent, and civic quality. The comparison dimension of the RCR is what I find to be the most valuable. If we improve by 10% in one of the indicators, that may sound like good news until we realize that other communities improved 25% while we were at our 10%. So we know we need to move fast enough. It also indicates for every indicator who is the leading community of the 20 of us. That gives us an opportunity to follow up with them. How are you doing that? How are you best at this? And what can we do? And how can we change our strategies to be better at it? So how does this relate to the topic today, which is what to do about the cliff? And I'm getting to that. It's collective impact. That's a strategy based on the promise that a boat moves faster when the rowers are all in sync. And I know that from personal experience. I've only rowed once, and that was when the school I was working at decided they needed to take the development team out on the river to show us how worthy the crew effort is in philanthropy support. And it was true. We did a lot of fundraising for the other sports, but not crew. Well, none of us had ever rowed before, and we were absolutely terrible, except for one moment when all the oars hit the water at the same point and we pulled. And the boat surged forward. And I will never forget that moment when all of the different organizations that make up a community, from nonprofit sector, philanthropy, business, and government, are all aligned and agree on the same pressure points, and then will develop strategies that complement one another. So we are great champions of collective impact. I'm sure everyone's heard about that model developed by Stanford professors some years ago. It has 5 basic elements, and it only works if all 5 of those are in play. The first is a common agenda. The second is shared measurements. The third is reinforcing activities. The fourth is continuous communication, and the fifth is a strong backbone organization. So the RCR is our community's shared measurements. It's data that we all believe tells the truth, the naked truth, about where we are, and it points us in the right direction. Philanthropy dollars are especially precious during these times and in what we're facing ahead. So we need to make sure they're being used as wisely as possible. We are finding that our grantees are using the common data to support their strategies toward addressing an issue. From the CEO of the new Skill Center in Tampa, there's this quote. She shared with us during our annual meeting that she used the RCR in planning the expansion of the Skills Center to decide what type of programming to include and other factors to consider when serving disconnected youth, such as transportation, housing, and the cost of living, and those other dimensions came into their planning process. Other nonprofits have said that it's valuable to them to have access to localized data because so much national data is outdated, and because it actually compares MSAs to one another, it can talk specifically about those issues that are prevalent in our community, and it's helped them apply for private, state, and federal grants. The more money we can pull in from other sources into our community, of course, the better off we are. So the issues that we're all facing are well beyond the ability of even the best endowed of us to solve. Cross-sector networks, we believe, are the key to addressing those issues. This last year, we granted out $32 million, but we feel like our biggest impact has been to serve as the backbone organization for several large networks that have been formed in our community. I believe that community foundations are uniquely qualified to be backbone organizations for collective impact initiatives, and hope to encourage all of you to consider that in your community and that work. I'm happy to answer questions or hear comments.
Marlene, can you give an example of one of those backbone organizations?
Well, we serve 4 different initiatives, and one is on early learning, one is on college completion, one is on digital access to digital programs, and one is on mental health. So those are collectives that have been put together with a number of different partners. LEAP, College Access Network, is our most mature collective impact program, and was actually awarded a national award as the best in the nation a couple of years ago. We keep bragging about it. And it's probably been more like 3 years ago, but we're very proud of that. And that kind of set a standard for these models to crop up in our community and to give practice to people from other dimensions like government to learn how to partner. What is a partner? What does a good partner do for those people that consider them partners or organizations? And built trust among community leaders. And when there's trust and you know someone and you trust them, you're much more able to listen to what they have to say and to act on that. So we think it's done a tremendous amount of good in our community.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, Lauren, I'm so interested to hear a little bit more about the program that you're working on. This is so timely with different issues coming up in the news with political campaign platforms, which we were talking about a little bit earlier, and something that resonates with so many young people today. So tell us a little bit about how the Greater Atlanta Community Foundation zeroed in on this issue topic of the loan debt, relieving loan debt, and how that, how that came to be, and where it's sitting right now in your community and what you're kind of seeing for the future.
Sure, thank you. So a little bit of context on how we landed at student loan debt being a place that we really wanted to plug in with our limited amount of resources. Kind of during the pandemic, we went through a strategic planning process. In addition to the pandemic that affected and shifted us all, we also went through pretty big leadership transition, as well as a real racial reckoning happening across the country really hit us and made us take a lot of steps back and question the way we sort of always done things and the way we wanted to do things moving forward. And so we developed a strategic plan really focused in on equity, and particularly making change in 4 particular systems that affect folks' lives, as well as 3 neighborhoods where we do deeper place-based work. And so the systems work that I manage is focused on income and wealth. So Atlanta is consistently ranked at the top of for the country for income inequality. We also have a racial wealth gap of 1 to 46 within the city of Atlanta, and the chances of a child born in poverty here in Atlanta making it out of poverty is about 4%. So we have a lot of work to do in that space. And the beginning of last year, which seems like a century ago, and yesterday all at the same time, we were really taking a step back and looking at what was happening as our economy was shifting, sort of coming out of the pandemic, and a lot of these government supports, the stimuluses, the advanced child tax credit, and the student loan moratorium were coming to an end. At that point in time, President Biden had presented $10,000 to $20,000 of student loan forgiveness, and it was being challenged at that moment in time. And there was a lot of chatter around direct cash transfers. We supported some of those programs, and we were definitely doing some advocacy around extending some of those payments. But we were really concerned about student debt. A lot of folks may not realize that actually during the pandemic, a lot of families were able to save in a way that they weren't prior to the pandemic and can't currently because of those stimulus payments, those child tax credits, and the student debt moratorium, as well as some other government programs that have since ended. And we were really concerned about what was going to happen to families when those student loan payments resumed. Even with that $10,000 to $20,000 of student loan forgiveness, the average student debt per borrower in Georgia is $40,000. So we knew folks were still going to have a lot of debt to pay down. And we looked around, we already had a scholarships program that's fairly robust. We support a lot of nonprofits doing great work in counseling students, helping them get into post-secondary education and avoid student debt, and as well as nonprofits that are doing great work with financial counseling, but there was no one doing student loan forgiveness. It's just such a huge need in our communities, and it's an expensive thing to do. So we decided to do a pilot program and essentially model it as a reverse scholarship. And we found it to be very successful. So in our first year, we had over 230 applicants. The application being open for just a month, and the total debt for those applicants was over $10 million of student debt. So we knew that there was a huge, significant need in our communities. For those 93 applicants that lived in one of our place-based zip codes, the average income was $46,000. About 66 of those 93 were first-generation college students. 25 of them had attended HBCUs. And applicant ages range from 17 years old to 76 years old. So these are folks that have been carrying this debt for a significant number of years, if not decades. And the average age was about 36, so a little bit older than we might have imagined going in. 16 of those applicants attended for-profit colleges, and 68 out of those 93 actually graduated or obtained a degree. The debt ranged from $2,000 to $300,000, and the average debt was rated around $40,000. So we eliminated almost $300,000 of student debt for 13 residents. We just finished that about 6 months ago, and since then, already 2 of those residents have purchased their own homes. So we see a lot of potential for this type of work. It is an expensive program, and so we're pairing it with things like advocacy that are a better, sort of bigger and longer term solution to this problem, but we're excited that we get to fill a gap for residents in the meantime.
So Lauren, for more long term, the next phase, where do you see, what do you see as maybe the next phase? And then, if you had your magic wand, what do you imagine that to be?
Sure. So we're thinking through what advocacy can look like in a more dedicated way, both on the prevention and elimination side. We know that there are folks just locked into student debt. In particular, the oldest resident that we selected is well into her 70s and accumulated debt decades ago for a degree that she just never actually obtained. And so we want to do advocacy on both sides. Georgia is actually one of the few states in the country that does not provide need-based aid to post-secondary students. So that is one thing that we are pushing for here in the state. There are also some things that schools here in Georgia can do a little bit differently so that students are more aware of the debt that they're signing up for. I don't know if you remember when you were 18 and you were thinking about how to pay for college, and the difference between $1,000, $10,000, $50,000, it means very little to an 18-year-old, but it means a lot once you're sort of in the adult working world. So there's a lot that our local institutions can do around transparency for students so they understand exactly what they're signing up for, and they are able to persist all the way through to a degree to get that higher income. And then on the elimination side, how we can support folks.
Sorry, I muted myself. I think this is so interesting. In our community, one of the things that we're funding is a pilot with the public university here, funding students that enrolled but dropped out, but they're still living here locally. So what does it cost to get them back in school, and what kind of specific services and support and counseling do we need to provide to get them to success? We don't know that yet. So we've picked a group and we're funding this for 2 years to see what we can learn. Because again, how do we minimize these costs, and how do we maximize the opportunity for these individuals? So I really applaud this program. Thank you. I wanted to go back to Joel for a minute. Joel, I'm so interested in the childcare because, again, when it checks every box, it crosses over every issue. And you've kind of been in crisis mode, building awareness and trying to stopgap this loss and help these families. Where have you seen success in building some other partnerships for funding and being able to kind of sustain and maybe start to grow this local support and awareness for the importance of early childhood education and quality early childhood education?
Yeah, first of all, listening to Lauren and Marlene talk about their individual projects, it's awesome. That's why I love doing these kinds of things. You hear about other communities. But to your point, your question, Jennifer, part of what attracted me to Park City beyond the incredible mountains and outside activities is for a community foundation president, there's huge opportunity. We've got a very affluent and generous community. Most people weren't born and raised in Park City. They moved here after accomplishing some really big things, and they want to give back to the community. So we've had very generous donors engaged in early childcare, as well as the 2 resorts here. We've got Vail Mountain and Altera, Deer Valley, and they've been involved. So it just so happened last year, this is just part of the stuff that happens in Park City. Vail was decommissioning their gondolas. And so they said, if you can sell them, you can keep the money. And so it's like, who in the world is going to buy a gondola? What kind of community is this? We made $400,000 selling gondolas to people to stick them in their yards. And that also created some community awareness. So we've had a lot of philanthropic interest. But over the long term, philanthropy is not going to solve the early childcare crisis. We need systemic solutions that are boiled down to policy. So our next step right now, and what we found in trying to move forward a solution is government says it's business's responsibility. Business says it's government's responsibility. Everybody's looking to the affluent donor or the parent, and all these kinds of implicit biases about, why should we subsidize early childcare? I mean, I want to afford a Mercedes too. And it's just these almost racist kinds of expressions sometimes. And then we have a state that doesn't make it very easy for families to access federal funds that pass through the state, and a federal government that's not really investing in early childcare in the ways that we need and would know have a return on that investment. So that's just the context, right? And we can't wait any longer for the state or the federal government. Even though realistically, we know they need to be critical players in any kind of systemic solution. So what we're doing right now is we are engaging in kind of a pseudo strategic planning process. What we want to do is create a prototype and have conversations with the key players individually. In an ideal world, business folks, what would be business's contribution? What is the ideal way you could play in this space to provide early childcare for your workers and for our community? Ask the same and lead those conversations. What can you do, government? What can you do, local providers? And put together a prototype that identifies the different tranches that people could take for a local solution. And from there, we can say, okay, this is what a solution could look like, and here's where we are now. And in our conversations, how do we move from here to there? And who knows if that'll work, but we just can't wait around any longer.
I think that's excellent. I interact with our early learning coalition here, and it's interesting also because the way they're organized and funded now, it's very government driven. They don't raise money or really have a philanthropic mindset. So when they talk about childcare and they talk about where their resources come from, it's like it's another language, and it is hard to get a compelling, impassioned plea or case from it, because it's almost very formulaic and I don't know, not impassioned. It's just reflective of the way they operate and where their funds come from. So you really are kind of taking two completely separate worlds and meshing them.
I will say that our local school system is stepping up, and they're expanding their funding to pre-K 4 and 5-year-olds, and that's going to cost the district $2.6 million. And so now we get to focus on the 0 to 3 space, which is super helpful. And I'm sure Park City, our community, Summit County, isn't different than the communities you're all working in, where the cost of tuition, there's a federal guideline, it shouldn't be any more than 7% of a family's income. We're averaging about 10% in Summit County. And the way the funding model works, especially in the nonprofit sector, is the cost of tuition is only 50% the cost of service. So they have to fundraise for every child that attends their center. So the idea of expanding, we need more access, we need more seats, but that means that their fundraising nut, their soft money nut, is bigger, and that creates a even more precarious financial position for our centers. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, where they want to provide more access, they want to provide cheaper access, but to expand puts them in a position of a really precarious financial position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just makes it even harder.
Yes.
So to all three of you, I think something we struggle with in my community is engaging corporate citizenry and corporate support for these issues, which are intricately related to the companies, but I'm not sure the companies see them that way. So how have you used your issues to connect or build a relationship or build awareness with some of the companies that are based in your communities? Lauren, maybe I could start with you.
Sure. We've actually just over the last several months started engaging a couple of our corporate supporters on this issue. I think it's relatable and easily digestible. Probably potentially, the folks we're meeting with, but certainly many of their employees likely hold student debt, so it's something they can understand. And so we have been in talks about support of our program, but also about advocacy for their employees that have student debt, things like financial coaching and counseling for folks that are carrying it, and a few different avenues. I think there are lots of possibilities and lots of potential for them to be involved.
Great. Marlene?
Well, you're all singing the same tune that we are, in that philanthropy, even if it could, should not take on this burden alone. We can't, to begin with. But that's what I worry about, is that, well, just get rich people to give more money and that'll happen. No, that doesn't work. But I do think that oftentimes the different sectors, government, especially, and business, need some help in how they can help, that they don't think about that. So for example, in our early learning initiative, we're part of, we brought in the program, I think it started down in South Florida, Bosses for Babies. And it's an award given to a CEO whose company reflects family values. And there are tiers, it's like LEED certification, with different levels. Well, same thing about company can evaluate itself and be evaluated by different levels of support that they provide for employee families. And it's simple enough, like we moved up because it's our initiative. I think it was gold. We felt like we needed to be platinum at the top of this. So what was the difference between gold and platinum? Dollars wise, it was insignificant to us. So it was really a matter of the will to say, we will do this. And other companies are coming to that same conclusion. So I do think, in my experience working with businesses and business people and government, they do have a different perspective. And Jennifer, you hit the nail right on the head with our, like, I call them statewide funded organizations that have money to give. So you have to understand their perspective and then sometimes guide them to what they could do that could be much simpler than they're imagining it would be to actually be helpful. And if the team is big enough, people want to be on the team. If it's significant enough, they want to be a part of it. That's what we're finding. We look for top leaders to be on our leadership councils of our initiatives. And then we bring together our vision councils, which are the CEOs of all of our partners. We just did that recently for the Vision Council for LEAP. And it was a phenomenal meeting with people sitting across the table from one another, the president of the bank, the superintendent of school, talking about the same issue and what every one of us as a partner needs to be able to do from our perspective to help lessen the burden on families. So it's all related.
Excellent. Joel, do you have anything to add on this?
Not really. I thought you said it well, Marlene.
Great. Lauren, I want to go back to you for a quick second. So you said that the forgiving of the loans kind of works like a reverse scholarship. So I apply, I successfully meet your criteria, I live in the right zip codes, I have the right amount of debt, the right amount of income. So do you just send me a check and I get to write off my debt? Are there expectations? How would it work?
Sure. So yeah, you apply just like you would to any scholarship program, and we evaluated based on exactly what you listed out: financial needs, zip code, amount of debt, etc. We did put a cap at $30,000 last year because we wanted to really make our $300,000 stretch. It's a little bit higher this year, but we have to cap because unfortunately people have debt into the high six figures. But yeah, and so once we selected folks, we sent them an email, asked them to submit their documents, and we received their payoff amounts and paid that exact amount to their student loan providers rather than sending them a check, so that we weren't also sending them a tax bill.
Oh, that's excellent. I really love that. And do you the funds that you've set aside, the 300,000, is that through the community foundation? Is that through your donor advised fund holders? Is that through other local partners? Where are you getting that from?
Sure. So the bulk is from our discretionary funds that we've set aside. And then we also have a couple of donor advised funds that have chosen to support this initiative as well.
Great. Jessica just reminded us in the chat, please, if you have any questions, we're right at 2:45, so we've got almost 15 minutes. I can ask questions until tomorrow, but if anyone has any burning questions, please put them in the chat and I'll try to grab them. Until then, one of the things that we struggle with here, or not struggle, but are really trying to affect change with our nonprofits, is trying to help them be more sustainable, to be more strategic about their budget and operations, to look meaningfully at the programs that they offer and partnerships, so that it's just not hand to mouth constantly, which was really crippling once COVID hit. So could each of you touch a little bit on, or any of you, maybe some things your community foundation is doing just more broadly to help the nonprofits be more strategic and think about the sustainability of their programs and organizations. Joel, do you want to go first?
Sure, it's such a big question. What we have found is our nonprofit leaders, we've got a very strong nonprofit sector here in Summit County, and they're thinking about sustainability all day, every day. And there are different kinds of organizations that lend themselves more to a fee-for-service model. and can wean themselves a little bit off of the soft money that is kind of the hamster wheel. And for those organizations, they're thinking a lot about how do we do it. Other organizations that are serving really low-income folks, providing healthcare, for example, for undocumented, uninsured people, they're less well positioned to get money for services. They can apply to county or state funding programs, which they do, but it's a really challenging thing. As a community foundation, we'll help them think through their financial models, but we try to avoid putting any kind of restrictions or show us your path to sustainability when you're applying this grant. All of our grants are unrestricted. We strive for multi-year grants, and to the extent we're able to engage in trust-based philanthropy, we want our application process to be easy. We want them focused on running their programs, not writing good essays for us. And our reporting requirements are fairly light. And that's a delicate dance with donors. If I'm going to give $50,000, I want to make sure I have an impact. As the CEO of the community foundation, I want to make sure that the money we used is having the impact we intend. But that's on us, and I can't put the burden we have for our donors on the people we're granting to who are doing the service work. So we have to invest in an evaluation, and we have to invest in the conversations with our donors, explaining why we're engaged in trust-based philanthropy. And then we also need to build a relationship with our nonprofit leaders so that they're willing to share information with us that in other contexts with other kinds of relationships could put funding at risk. If we don't do that, then we can't help support the sector in a really authentic way. And instead, it becomes a charade. And I've played that game too. I mean, it still goes on. There's a power dynamic that we just have to admit to and try to counterbalance. So I think they're doing the work primarily of thinking about sustainability, and we're here to support them in what they think the best direction is.
That's excellent. We just had a senior team planning session Monday, and one of the things we are really focusing on is trust-based philanthropy. And so one of our goals for this year is to kind of define or put to pen and paper what trust-based philanthropy means for us at this time. What, like you mentioned, multi-year funding. And I just think for us to really think that through, and then it'll help us be able to explain to our donors, which was a great point. So Lauren, tell me a little bit about your impression of this question and how Atlanta's Community Foundation is helping nonprofits be more sustainable.
Yeah, I echo everything Joel said. I think we have an excellent nonprofit ecosystem across Atlanta, really smart leaders thinking about sustainability and how they can continue to meet their mission with less resources and greater need every day. We similarly have eliminated some of the barriers in terms of accessing our funding, eliminated some of the reporting requirements, and tried to get creative around, maybe having meetings with folks rather than requesting a written report, some things around that, but also getting more creative in how we can have deeper relationships with our partners and being more connective tissue between the various nonprofits that we're meeting with every day, make sure that they are partnering and collaborating in all of the possible ways to stretch their resources and uplifting their work and making sure that we're beyond funding, which is obviously incredibly important, but supporting them in every way that we can because they do incredible work.
Thanks, Lauren. All right, Marlene, any thoughts on this?
We're endowment champions, and so we offer a match program for every $100,000 that goes into endowment. We've put in another 25, and that match has enabled nonprofits to motivate their donors. We give them some strategies too, like someone who gives you money every year, let them know they'll be missed when they're gone. They could create an endowment that makes sure that your organization receives monies long after they've departed. The other thing we started a few years ago was allowing our nonprofits to create what we're calling reserve funds, which are non-endowed funds with us that are then invested in our investment pool. many of the mid to smaller nonprofits don't have the wherewithal to invest the monies that they are holding. And this gives them an opportunity to get the gain in the market that have all seen, and allows them to do that. And the reserve funds have been extremely popular. What we're finding too is that if they let their donors know that these funds to benefit them are here at the Community Foundation, they'll contribute right into the funds, from their retirement distributions to their estate planning. We've seen some huge estates realized where the monies have gone directly into funds to benefit specific nonprofits. So the other thing we do is we pay for training. We have a great nonprofit organization here that provides training to nonprofits and their leadership especially, and we underwrite some of those programs so that people can attend those programs at no cost.
I want to thank Rose for her question. Hers is for you, Marlene. What is the fee structure for your reserve fund?
The fee structure for the reserve fund is, I think well, they put the money into the reserve fund, and the fee structure is, I think it's 2%.
Okay. So similar to the other fees for your funds.
Yes, yes. We've tried to keep it as low as possible.
And
Yes.
do you match that, like you match an endowed gift?
No, we don't.
Okay.
The endowment is because it's permanent,
Yeah.
perpetual. That's our rationale. We don't match reserve funds, but they do require the signed approval of both the CEO and the board, because our board didn't want there to be some dispute if somebody took money out without the other knowing.
Yeah.
And other than that, they're available to the nonprofits.
That's really interesting because one of our funders was it's a private foundation in the community, and they received a lot of requests from nonprofits who had depleted their reserves as a result of COVID. So we are actually kind of researching how we could set up a reserve fund program. And so I'm going to call you after this, but
Sure.
That's exactly something that we're seeing at a local level that could need attention. Well, I don't see any further questions, and I've actually gone through mine. Joel, Lauren, Marlene, do you guys have any other final thoughts you wanted to add to wrap this wonderful conversation up?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joel.
After you.
I was just going to briefly say appreciation to the Council on Foundations. I think in part some of the focus that's been put on community foundations, I don't know if you all agree, but my sense is that the profile of community foundations is rising as we've become more effective in our communities. Our value has been more appreciated, which gives us then the wherewithal to be able to help lead in some of these situations. And I think leading is something we're very, very able to do. So just appreciation to the council on that. And we're a good investment because we're place-based. We're focused on our own communities. And as Joel said earlier, what happens most happens locally. So we're the key to success for many of our communities to thrive.
So beautifully said. Joel?
A lot of us in our work are working with organizations that are dealing with our community's greatest systemic challenges, and they're doing it on shoestring budgets without the advantage of taxes. And in fact, the Community Foundation whole philanthropic system is set up in some ways as an adjunct to the taxation system, because you get a tax benefit to utilize towards public good. And I think in the foundation sector, part of why community foundations and other philanthropies are getting so much attention is we have billions and billions and trillions of dollars under management, providing tax breaks and earning interest that isn't getting out into the community. So that's counter, I think, to a lot of our missions, even though that is how we were set up. And it's this kind of tension we face as leaders. How do we get more money into our community while running a stable organization? And I don't think we want to just be a tax shelter for the affluent. That's not our mission, right? And I think the attention is just even from policymakers, and hopefully it's going to be a motivating force for our boards of directors to think through, how do we just not grow an endowment? How do we do more than a 4.5%, 5% distribution? Because our communities are facing really big challenges now, and we need the money to flow now. So I really appreciate the conversation. I just wanted to highlight that tension that we're all facing.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. All right, Lauren, anything from you?
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to discuss our program. It's been an honor to be able to speak to it and to hear from Joel and Marlene and the wonderful work that they're doing. Really grateful for everyone who called in and is interested in the work that we're all doing. And our team is always happy to connect with folks who want to learn more. So our door is open for anyone who's interested.
Well, I hope you all will join me in thanking our panelists. I think Joel, Marlene, and Lauren, you did a tremendous job of sharing your individual experiences and your personal values and the promise and potential that community foundations hold. And I also want to express my appreciation to the Council on Foundations and to Melissa Nolan for helping set this up. And here at Council on Foundations and CEONet, we were really happy to help put this together. If you have ideas or topics you'd like us to cover in the future, send those to Melissa. We track and talk about them. We all meet on a regular basis, and we'll put together a new schedule for the fall and spring. So let us know any topics you'd like us to cover. And again, I wish you safe travels, a little extra joy and fun this summer, so we're all refreshed and ready for what I know will be a really, really dynamic fall. So everyone, God bless you, and thank you for joining us, and be safe. Take care.
Thank you all. Take care.
So,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Yeah, take care.